It's that time again. Thank you, everybody. Really glad to have you here for another episode of Swedenborg in Life. Before I get to anything, I want to hook you by putting interesting things on the screen. So these are what we're going to talk about today. We have the church as an internal state. We have how religious affiliation affects participation in the inner church. And that is as short as I could get that thought. How to turn truth into spiritual goodness. In case you had a garage full of truth and you're like, what I really want this to be is spiritual goodness. So that's great. Thanks for coming here. My name is Curtis Childs. I'm with the Swedenborg Foundation. And this is a clue to this mystery of how could you ever have a show that tells you about those things that I just listed? Well, because Swedenborg is why. And the Swedenborg Foundation is a nonprofit that is just trying to get people to look at this material that Swedenborg recorded because it's fascinating stuff. I'm not going to be navigating it alone today. I have two guests with me. I have Reverend Chuck Blair and I have Chelsea Rose. You can see them right there, Chelsea Rose. Thank you guys for coming. Great to have you. Yeah, so they both have websites and I'm going to plug them right now. Not that they asked me to, but I like to do it because you guys might find them interesting. So Chelsea is co-editor of what is called a web magazine, or I call it a spiritual blog. I don't know what the kids call it, but newchurchperspective.tv, and there's a link to it in the description. And Chuck is the senior pastor, we'll call you that,
yes,
at New Church Live, which is newchurchlive.tv. And I'm really happy to have both of you here because you both play different parts in this whole thing of kind of spiritual / religious / church, and we'll get to all that material kind of hitting the web and interacting with people. So our topic today is how the true church doesn't have to do with religious affiliation. And I want to start by saying, so I work for the Swedenborg Foundation, and we have material from Swedenborg, and he talks about church all the time, and church is this intense loaded term. I don't know if you've ever had this, but I'll post a video and it just says something like heaven in it, and I'll get somebody going off at me about it, like, you fascists, how can you something, and even if the content of the video is harmless, but because there's been all this experience with church. Have either of you ever experienced somebody having some kind of negative reaction to religious type stuff?
Yes. I once, when we started our newchurchperspective.com, we were just getting the word out. So I sent it as a mass email list to some friends, just hey, here's this website. You might want to check it out. Great. And I got this response back from one of my friends who was totally outraged that I would be proselytizing to her about, wanting to adopt my whatever. And it was no, that's not what I'm doing. Yeah. I'm just sharing a website, thanks.
Yeah. Chuck?
Yeah, I mean, as a pastor, we've tried to create a church for people who haven't been at church for a long time. So, mm-hmm. Needless to say, you mentioned the church word, and it's this allergic reaction. And I think for a lot of people, a quote I love is, most people know just enough religion to make them miserable. Yeah. And I think that's very true. So church is a very loaded term for a lot of people.
And so what we're going to do is unload it here.
Good.
So, and I think that all this, how could you, if church is really something that's good, how come so many people don't like it? Or if it's really something that's bad, how come so many people like it, right? That's kind of the crux of it. And I think it all sort of comes down to these concepts we're going to talk about here that Swedenborg gets at with the idea of what is the actual church and what is the individual church and what is the global church. So if you guys want to follow along with our material, go to the description of this video, open up that little description drawer, and in there is a PDF that we've put together. This is selected quotes from all over Swedenborg's works. So let's get to it now. Our first quote comes from True Christianity, and that's a book of his that I'm sure has a title that would give most people the most allergic reaction they could get. But we're going to get to it now. All right, so here it is. This is the very beginning of the PDF, and this is from True Christianity 767. So all of Swedenborg, and maybe this was a thing to do back in the day, but he paragraph numbered all his stuff. So that's why we have these numbers by him, which is handy because he has such a mountain of material. It makes it easy to navigate, as we're doing right now. So let's start. What is this thing? What is the church? If we have faith in the Lord and goodwill toward our neighbor, we are a church in miniature. The church as a whole is composed of such churches in miniature. So there we have a little opening shot. from Swedenborg where he's saying, and we have a diagram of this. Okay, ready? Here's a diagram. That is a person who is large, and what this is got something shining out, and which is obviously light coming out is a symbol of an internal state, and I mean like a state of mind, state of heart. This person has something, as Swedenborg says, goodwill toward the neighbor inside their heart. So this is a church. A person is a church in miniature. Then, if we zoom out a little bit, there are people all around the world who have this inside them, this love for the human race, this belief in a higher power. And Swedenborg is saying that all those people, and see if you guys agree with me, I would say even those people probably aren't aware of each other necessarily, and they can belong to different, what we would call churches, religious organizations, but yet they can still form this whole, which is kind of the broad church. Is that, Chuck, does that seem like a legit place to start?
Yeah, it does. I was thinking as you were saying that, Curtis, I was at a conference and a scientist was talking about how if you take a particle and you split it in half, and you have half on Earth and half on Pluto, and you turn the half on Earth, the half on Pluto turns too. Yeah. And I think it's that kind of thing. Like there's this connection of humanity that is at our deepest level. I love the idea that religion, religio, means to reconnect, and that should be churches at its best, appealing to that core oneness that we have inside.
Yeah, and so makes me think. So Swedenborg gets very specific in what a lot of people would call theology. You know, like he talks about this is what God is like. These are the different levels of the mind. This is how angels do this. This is this stuff about the Bible. But yet, so he's not like just kind of wishy-washy, like it's all fine, doesn't matter what you think. However, Chelsea, he says that people from different religions, what we would call religions, can actually both be, even if they have these different beliefs, they can both be part of the church, as he's talking about it. How will you defend him, please, on this? Because how does that make sense?
Well, I think it makes me think of a time when I was in the airport and I saw a guy who had clearly just come in from India and he needed help getting his cart out. And clearly I would have identified him as a Hindu, and I'm a Christian, but I wanted to help him. He was, this cart was jammed. He couldn't get it out, and I'm not going to be, just judging him on the basis of this exterior thing of he is a part of this, religious affiliation and I'm a part of this one. But I move with compassion to want to help this guy. And so I helped him and he was really thankful. So it's like those kinds of interactions that sort of show us that that the church that we're talking about is really an inner thing that we all can connect to.
Yeah, sort of common humanity. And I have a few more thoughts on it, but I'm not sure if Swedenborg is about to say this. So let's get back to our PDF. I don't want to preempt him, Okay, so we've gone through our first quote. Oops, I bumped my microphone. I'm not supposed to do that. We've gone through our first quote. We're getting to our second one. This is from Secrets of Heaven. And you can see this is a high paragraph number because, man, there are, depending on your translation, 15 volumes of Secrets of Heaven. So this is a big one. And we found this in the middle. It is also important to realize that everyone who lives a good life, as inspired by neighborly love and taught by faith, is a church and a kingdom of the Lord. And Chelsea, I'm thinking of, you want to help this guy. That's neighborly love. This is the universal church. Such a person is consequently called a temple, too, and a house of God. People who are individual churches make up the church as a whole, no matter how far apart they live. And so that has, it's got similarities to the first quote, but I feel like there's some nuance in there, this idea of we are a temple, that the temple is where charity and love can kind of be housed, and that because Chuck, if you have a bunch of people showing up to a church service, but there's no internal temples in those people, I mean, it probably doesn't have the same mood, right?
Right. And it's so easy to kind of get caught up in that external part of what church looks like. And the reality is church should be this more internal state. And it's not an internal state as in, it's when you say that it sounds so esoteric, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is it's this internal state that's alive. I mean, I love the idea that the word enthusiasm, entheo, in God, like that's what that word was supposed to mean. It was supposed to mean you were enthusiastic, you had energy around life. And I love the words of Abraham Joshua Heschel. He's a rabbi who marched with Martin Luther King, and he said, in Selma, my legs were praying. And I love that idea. That's where it finds a container and a base from a Swedenborgian perspective. It's this goodwill, but it's a lived goodwill, and it's a human being taking on church or regarding themselves as a temple as a way to move these kinds of pieces of humanity forward.
Yeah, man. And I'm thinking, Chelsea, about sort of your interaction at the airport, and that there's sort of a deep, a more heartfelt belief in process there. Like you can say, oh, I have these kind of religious beliefs, but actually a more core belief is I want to help someone if they need help, and that that's the church, So and that okay, so these are we made some assertions. Who knows if they're true or not? We'll find out in our next quote here. Okay, so getting back to the PDF. Okay, this is from Heaven and Hell. So Swedenborg's most famous book, Heaven and Hell. So we'll take a little quote from there. Then this is similar. I have a little section here in the beginning where it's all similar stuff. The Lord's church is spread throughout the whole world. It is universal then, and consists of all individuals who have lived in the virtue of thoughtfulness according to the principles of their religions. So Chelsea, I'm thinking he sort of is saying it's less about what the principles of your religion is, and more about that you're following those principles in sort of some kind of charity, right?
Right. I mean, I think that the different, religions teach us how to live. And so whatever, if you were born in a part of the world where you get brought up Jewish or Hindu or any religion, then the teachings of your faith are meant to flow into how you live. And if they're flowing into how you live, then it's sort of flowing into that sort of the common artery that we have of loving our neighbor and, looking to God and loving the neighbor.
Yeah, and that I think there's maybe a reason why people sort of think of religions in the same vein, that there's something in all religions of, I want to be a better person, or this feels like love somehow. And I think that's what pulls people into them, and that Swedenborg would say that's God's operation is, these different sort of belief systems are suited to different people or exist in different areas, but they can all be leading you up, and it's really, rather than the particular facts that you grab onto, it's the process of taking that journey up. So maybe you guys agree with that, maybe you don't. You have 15 seconds to think about it as we move to our video break. We'll see you back here. Refresh. So, when I saw that one of our quotes was from Heaven and Hell, it reminded me that I forgot to do our little intro. That when these guys came in, I was prepping them, okay, we're going to do this intro where I'll talk about the hell mindset and the heaven mindset. And then that got me thinking about, so I skipped it, but you guys can take a look at it from another show. But that got me thinking about the graphics in general, which got me thinking about Matt, who is back there right now. He's if you guys see, Off the Left Eye videos, he's like the animator for all of them. He made the graphics for this, and it's his birthday today. So happy birthday, Matt. If you guys want to write him a birthday message, that would be great. Okay, now, I hope he doesn't shut us down. Okay, now let's go back to our PDF, and we're going to get into a longer thought here. And this is into I want to set this up for a second, if I may. So here he's going to talk about Christians and non-Christians. And that is, in Swedenborg's day, Europe was very Christian, theocracy still, and it wasn't really as hip to say everybody goes to heaven, it's all about principles of religion. So back then there was very much a mentality of, okay, we're Christians, other people are not. There's no negotiation. This is the right way, that's the wrong way. So. I just want that to inform this as we get into it here. Okay, here we go. So far as the Lord's spiritual church goes, it is important to realize that it extends throughout the inhabited world. It is not limited to the people who have the Word, and by the Word he means the Bible, and therefore know the Lord, and by the Lord he means Jesus, and some truth taught by the faith. It also exists among people who do not have the word, are completely ignorant of the Lord as a result, and therefore do not know of any of faith's true concepts. All the truth of faith has to do with the Lord. In other words, it exists among nations far distant from the church. Many of the people in those nations have enough rational light to recognize that there is one God, that he created everything and preserves everything, and that everything good, and consequently everything true, comes from him, and that to be like him is to be blessed. In addition, they live according to their religion, loving that God and their neighbor. So a couple of things in there I wanted to touch on. That Chelsea, just like we were saying before, this idea that it's about that common artery, and that it's the kindness thing, and he's kind of dipping into that again here, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead. Did you want to say one more?
Well, it just something in that reading made me think about how the church, that I think that makes it sound like even if if somebody has never heard of Jesus and they're just living some different religion, then that's okay. But I think it might raise this question of, do people who do know about the Christian faith and still choose to live their life according to another religion, is that somehow not okay? And I don't think that's what Swedenborg's saying at all.
Right,
I think there's a point that Swedenborg makes in other passages is how much care God takes in wanting to protect people and their ideas about what they think life is like. And so it's not about, someday everybody's going to be, becoming culturally Christian.
Yeah.
I think people will continue to live and thrive in their different religious beliefs, whether or not they know about the Lord.
That's a good
Jesus,
point. Well, because, and you can kind of see the way it is in people's mind. I mean, you can have somebody who's very into religion or Jesus Christ or Christianity or something, yet when you talk with them about it, when you see how that makes them treat other people, it feels just hard and spiky, and it doesn't, but yet you can have somebody else who's into something else, and diverse, it could be another spiritual tradition, it could be some kind of, like, they're getting out into nature, something like that, or even like a hobby or something, where you can see, like, this creates something living and kind in them, and you sort of see, like, where is that divine sort of flowing in here. And so you bringing that up makes me want to read the rest of this passage, because he sort of goes on in that vein. So we'll get it back to that. Loving that God and their neighbor. So yeah, loving the God of their religion and their neighbor. Their passion for goodness leads them to do deeds of neighborly kindness, and their passion for truth leads them to worship the supreme being. Non-Christians who are like this are those who are in the Lord's spiritual church. Although they do not know the Lord in this world, still, if they have goodness, they harbor a reverence for and tacit acknowledgement of him inside themselves, because in all goodness the Lord is present. And that, I mean, that's another conversation sort of about the person of Jesus, and and which is something we probably don't have time for here, but Chuck, just briefly, he sort of talks about Jesus as, this is the human visible God. I mean, that's what's important about the Jesus thing, and that there he's saying, in all goodness there is the human God. So it's something expansive, and big, and something that is not just like, okay, here's the Christian, that, you know what I mean? Right.
It's I love the word incarnational. And incarnational is real simple. It's the idea that Christ is God with skin on. And we can always doubt what people say, but we can't really doubt what he did. And that piece of following Christ, for me, from a new church person, it's not about worshiping him, which is not what he commands. It's about following him. It's about really taking up that whole follow me and looking at what he did in terms of service, what he did in terms of reaching out, welcoming all, and really finding ways to live into that. That's how I would see the new church view of Christ.
And where you see the things, the teachings of Jesus, you see echoed in all these other faiths, the basic, golden rule, that he restates, these kinds of things. So that's how you can have someone following that thing, even if they're not following it with this branding on it, and I think that's, and that another thing is Swedenborg is talking about the importance of, having a God you can relate to. Right. Like that he thought that, he said, he has this quote, we are we are human because God is human. And who knows what it all means, but
Yeah.
I know, and I always mention this because I love this movie. I just love this part in Bruce Almighty. You guys know that movie? And Morgan Freeman shows up and he doesn't know who he is, and he's like, I don't know. And there are a lot of other movies where God shows up as a person and he's just a regular person. That's powerful to me.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's something of that there.
Could I jump in there for a second?
Yeah, man. As much as I hate to seed the floor, I will.
Well, one of the, I'm very blessed at New Church Live to work with a lot of people who are rediscovering faith in their lives. And this one man was talking about, what appeals to him about the new church. And he said, oh, it's C-level Christianity. I thought C-level is a little weird. And he said, no, SEE level. That it's I-level Christianity.
Yeah.
And that idea of it being very powerful because it is in human form, like that humanity and the divinity and how the two kind of go together, I think is so powerful.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why you encounter a lot of people who don't want anything to do with organized religion is you see there are people that are in these churches and in these religions, but yet aren't acting more humane. And
Right.
Probably a lot of people are thinking it would be better if they didn't have that church to justify and reinforce and entrench these unkindnesses. So those are good thoughts, and I think he touches on it more. Let's get back to our PDF here. Non-Christians who are like this are those who are in the Lord's spiritual church, although they do not know. Oh, I already read this. Because in all goodness the Lord is present. So they readily acknowledge him in the other life and welcome the truth that goes with a faith in him, more than those Christians whose goodness is fainter. So a lot of what Swedenborg's role was at the time was a reformer. That he was trying to, because the Christian church in his day was a mess. Even people now call the Christian church now a mess, but back in that theocratic Europe, I mean that was a much bigger mess. So he spends a lot of energy trying to say you got to turn this thing around, and so and his audience a lot of it was Christian. So. Chelsea, he talks a lot about something called faith alone. Do you want to just give a teeny tiny synopsis of what is that and what is he rallying against there?
Yep, my first thought on thinking about faith alone is the idea that it's just about knowing the right information and that's enough. And but if that's not being turned into action, or it's not being used to transform yourself or to be, believing in a power greater than yourself and being able to serve your neighbor, then it's really useless information. So if somebody can have, I know of people who just spent their whole lives studying the Bible, but they never felt like it transformed themselves. And so all of that information, they can beat other people over the head with it, but it's really not helping them or helping anybody else, unless it's being personally transformative and leading them to, look to serve others.
Yeah. Yep. And how he saw that is like this, you don't really have, it's not like, I'm a vegetarian. I've read all the vegetarian literature. I went to this rally and stuff like that. Do you want to come over to my house? We're having steak. But in religions, you often have this. The price of entry is knowledge, or saying some words, or something like that.
Right.
And there, so, you get all kinds of sticky situations like that. So. Some thoughts, there are thoughts, and Swedenborg's a little stirred around. Hopefully you have your own. Which reminds me, at the end, we're going to be taking questions from the audience and comments and all that. So if you guys have something, just write it down here on YouTube. Or if you came via Facebook, you don't have a YouTube account, go back to Facebook and write some of that stuff in. And because we want to hear your voice as well. The more voices, the merrier. And you have 15 seconds to do it during this video break. And then we'll be back to have your full attention. So, that picture there is the tunnel, the tunnel of near-death experiences. And I just think that's a whole other realm, is sort of this, the experience people have, probably everyone has read one by now, but it wasn't so back in the day. But just thinking about that, often those clash with churches, that people will say, okay, I saw God, and they bring back this message of like, wow, I am realizing that I wasn't that nice to everyone before, but I want to change. I want to do that now. They bring back this message of everybody loves everyone. There's this great God. But there was a lot of churches that would say, wait, you got this point wrong. You got this point wrong. So that's from the devil. I run like pages and stuff where people come and tell about their near-death experiences, and I'll have Christians come on there or other religious people and say, that's the devil trying to deceive. Like, this beautiful experience. I saw my grandma, and she looked young again. She didn't have cancer. It's just so wonderful. I came back, and that's the devil. And I think that, and I don't want to pick on those people, but that's a problem. The people see that, and they're like, I don't want to get anywhere near religion. So that just made me think of that. Did that? I don't want to go back to the text because I want to. I gotta let you guys talk sometimes. So does that bring up anything for you guys? Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's like we get so consumed about being right, and religion's not about being right. As Chelsea said, it's about transformation. And the example I think of, it's driving down the right side of the street. Well, that's important to know, but driving down the right side of the street's not transformation. Like, transformation is something far greater. And that whole idea of using religion as a weapon, as a weapon to be right, just is not a good way to go.
Yeah, because that's just like, then what's the difference between religion and before you picked it up? Everybody's ego wants to be right, and if you can find something that will give you leverage, you'll use it. But there must be something different, about the spiritual transformation Chelsea was talking about, if it really is this thing.
Maybe can I say something?
All right, you can.
So it makes me think that people, join a religion or get drawn to a faith of some kind, and they connect. God might be able to be incarnated in a human form, but it's sort of generally acknowledged that God is infinite. This connects to this infinity. But we sort of get stuck in a corner if we are in a religion and we think that we can know everything about God, and I think people can get lost in that corner, even if they really looked at what the teachings of their faith are saying. Usually the sacred scripture is going to be pointing you towards this idea that, God is infinitely knowable. We're always in a path, we're on a path, that's a process. And so there's not, you question any doctrine that's telling you that now you know everything, and so you can know more than what other people know, or whatever. That sort of gets into that.
Yeah. I'm glad that you said that, because I think that what you have in religion or spiritual traditions often, and with Swedenborg too, is you're getting information about something that it's harder to gather direct information about. As in, you look at Swedenborg's experiences and he's talking about what it's like after death. He's talking about this spirit and how this stuff works. It's different than, if we're talking about Kmart, because I can go to Kmart and I can say, this is what Kmart is like.
Right.
And you think about, so Swedenborg writes these huge, extensive report of the afterlife. And I'll have other people, talking about their experiences of the afterlife, and there'll be something that sounds different than what Swedenborg is talking about, or two will differ from each other. But I'm thinking, if you just had a few little accounts of what Kmart is like, and somebody says, you go into Kmart and it's registers, and you're there and people just take things and they go across the registers. But someone else is like, no, I was in Kmart and there are shelves and shelves and the stuff is on the shelves. It's not at registers. These are just people going to different parts of it, or somebody like couldn't get through the airlock and they're like, it's just this place of glass. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And that would be for something simple, but these spiritual ideas are so complex. And that so I definitely try to come at it soft, with a soft edge, because people just in describing things that we can actually all access, we describe it in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So how much more so with this ineffable kind of stuff. So maybe it is good for me to let you guys talk once in a while. Okay, let's go back to the words on the page. So I think we were done this. Yep. So you can see we're on page 3. If you guys are wondering how did we get this thing, look in the description of the video here if you're just joining us, and you'll be able to get this very same document. So this is Secrets of Heaven again, 6786. Now, we're just going to have to rush past this beginning part because it doesn't make a ton of sense unless you know the context and know about correspondences, etc. But stick with me. A flock symbolizes both goodness and the church. So he's just talking about symbolism in a story, and so that's all that is. It's just a lead-in. That is, people who have goodness and are part of the church, because the two qualities are so closely connected that neither can be separated from the other. A person dedicated to the good urged by faith is a church, and a person who is a church is dedicated to the good urged by faith. So I heard you made a little noise, Chuck. Does that resonate with you?
One of my favorite Swedenborgian quotes is our job is to deliver our best intentions on God's behalf. Mm-hmm. You know, and I just love that idea. Like, hell is when we get all wrapped up in our compulsions, and heaven is when we can really start to deliver our intentions, our convictions to God, and say, here, help me to steer these and guide these. So that's what that quote brought up for me.
Yeah, the good that faith urges. So that we talk about these different traditions, and they all have something of, you know, here's how you stifle your negative tendencies. Here's how you, here's commands to help those around you and to improve yourself spiritually. And that here it's saying that those, you can't separate that good, you know, the doing stuff from church. I mean, that is, it's like I was saying, like, oh, I'm a vegetarian, or I'm a, you know, what else? I'm a pacifist, but, you know, I signed up for, I'm this thing where I kill everyone, you know, like that's a pretty good example. So, you know, there are certain things that have a definition, and Swedenborg is saying that the definition of a church is doing good things that are taught to you by your tradition.
Something that makes me think of is, first of all, that, you know, Swedenborg is using the word church, and it's really hard to get disconnected from or to sort of put aside the very literal sense of that word. That like when I first hear church, I think of a building, or I think of the service, you know, like a worship service that you go to. But just to point out for people that church as more of the word that means like a community, and so the church community that you're a part of. And so to even get rid of the word church and just think about community, and that community being one that helps all of us turn towards goodness rather than towards, you know, selfish, harmful behaviors towards ourselves and others. It actually made me think of a sort of meditation that, a Buddhist meditation that I'm familiar with, where if you're going through a hard time, or you find yourself battling strong negative emotions of some kind, you can think, you think of yourself experiencing that emotion, but then you think about everybody else who might be struggling with that negative state. And then you think what you need to help yourself in that negative state, like, you know, compassion, or maybe forgiveness, or, you know, any number of positive traits or something. And you think of that, you know, breathing that in for yourself, but then also breathing it for everybody else who might be struggling with that. So that's this way of, like, even in our own personal day-to-day lives, we might be disconnected from a lot of other people, but we're connected to this church, this bigger, expansive church, by just thinking about everybody who's striving to live, you know, to live a life of, you know, that looks towards goodness.
Yeah. So, and that makes me think of, if I had remembered to do that heaven and hell thing in the beginning, that there you're kind of, okay, so I have this problem, let me think of usefulness to the human race. And Swedenborg talks about that heaven is essentially the joy of doing helpful things for other people. And so you're there in your negative state, and you're thinking, and thinking, okay, so I'm in this state, what do I need, and what could everyone else need? You know, this connection, and there's an element of help, even if it's just thinking about it. So that lifts the spirits.
And you're helping everybody else too.
Yeah, you're helping everybody else.
It out to.
Yeah, good. All right, so I think so far so good. And you also, I liked how you said the word church is really hard to separate, and I think that's part of why I wanted to do this show on it, because, you know, I'm asking people, go read Swedenborg, and if you do, you're going to hit this word church all over the place, and I don't want people to take it at face value, because he says he uses that term church to mean something pretty different than really now is traditionally meant by church, and so maybe I haven't done it so far, but I'm trying to do this so that we will understand he means something different. So good. You guys are doing a great job. This is good. Okay. And I like that you're just like, butting in when you need to now. So I'm not like dominating it. So that's good. That's good. That's what the people want. Okay. Now, next one on the PDF. This is from Secrets of Heaven. Again, you see, we're all over Secrets of Heaven. There's so much in there. Initially, he wrote Heaven and Hell, the book, as a way to try to get people to Secrets of Heaven, because Secrets of Heaven was so long and so involved that nobody wanted to get it. So he's like, wait. That was back still when he was anonymous. Anyway, that's another story. Today, people describe the church solely in terms... this is sort of what we're talking about. Today, people describe the church solely in terms of religious teachings, which they use as a means of distinguishing among the Lord's churches. And I think he would mean there the different kinds of Christianity, all the different factions. They do not care how adherents of those churches live, whether they nurse hatred for each other, rip each other apart like wild animals, rob each other, strip each other of reputation and status and wealth, or privately deny all that is holy. Yet the church can never exist in such people. It exists instead in people who love the Lord, love their neighbor as themselves, have a conscience, and oppose the kinds of hatred mentioned. So it seems like a pretty strong statement for what your church is built out of is this opposition to the kinds of things that anyone, regardless religion, no religion, knows are harmful, which is this kind of hatred. How much do you oppose that, and how much do you love the opposite? That's the church, right? Do you guys have any thoughts, reactions, rebuttals, anything like that?
Yeah, Curtis. I mean, as a pastor, you deal with that all the time, where people want to know, they want to get into a debate or an argument, and I always feel like, well, Chuck, what do you think about this? And they're not really asking me the question; they're telling me the question. They have a perspective they want to get across, and so they want to get into a theological argument. And my answer is, let's go down to the Ronald McDonald House and cook a meal. That's kind of, Swedenborg talks about love, wisdom, and use. And I think useful service, that endeavor to do what's good, it kind of answers all questions. Right. When we're down at the Ronald McDonald House, which we serve at a lot at New Church Live, the last thing you're thinking about is a theological fine point that you want to argue over. You're wondering, how do you serve this family who has a child with cancer? And that washes out all those other distinctions and that incredibly corrosive and toxic need to be right.
Yeah, and it makes me think, it's a great point. It makes me think of, Swedenborg describes that there is something called the ancient church, which is this is a church that used to exist back in history. We don't know exactly when in history, but he says there were a lot of different churches, like different, what we'd call religions or something, but they were all one because they all had the same sort of love at their core. And that arguing that you're talking about, you sort of talk about, religion in the Western world, maybe all over, is like Christianity, that kind of stuff. It's defined by arguments about hot button issues. Like, right. You're a Christian, so that means you have this stance on abortion, gay marriage. That's at the forefront of it all. And I think that's a symptom that basically the main way that you be a Christian or not a Christian is take stands on sort of a few hot button issues, right? And the rest of it is like secondary almost. And I think that can only pop up because there is kind of this emphasis on ideas and this lack of emphasis on being like cool and good. Chelsea, do you want to weigh in a little bit?
I think there's this way that we can look at other, or I guess this way that you can see when it listed, ripping each other apart and stealing wealth, really like wild animals. Yeah. I know. And all of these hellish ways of behaving. And I think it's easy when we're in a religious or thinking about our faith or something that we can look at other people and see the way that they're doing that. We can point that out in other people. But I feel like the way that faith is really personally transformative is by asking yourself, where am I doing that? and or how am I in a compulsive pattern of always, ripping apart my neighbor or whatever. So this self-examination that is really where, it's like a magnifying glass that like focuses the light on yourself for, transformation. And sometimes doing something like going down to, just getting an action, like serving somebody can just help distract you from those harmful mental patterns or whatever.
Yeah, it's a good point, because we don't want to be sitting here on Swedenborg Life, this show, like, oh man, those people are so bad that do that stuff.
Right.
It's like, seems like that's kind of like, what's the point then? But, and I've had recently had Peter Rhodes, you guys know him, on this show, and he likes to, so whenever he sees Swedenborg talking about certain kinds of people that do this, people that do that, even if Swedenborg really has seen all that in the Christian church of his day, you think about those are states inside me. Mm-hmm. And that kind of gets into Swedenborg's correspondences in the Bible and all that, like these events, or it talks about the nations or something, those are parts of you, so it is good to keep that in mind, because we can be harboring just the wrong attitude right here. So thank you for saving Chelsea. I was doing that. I was sitting there and I was like, those people do that? I would never do that when someone was watching. All right, good. Let us continue our... Oh, wait, never mind. We can't. So right now, we have to give you guys a break. I know you've all been screaming for a break, and we're going to give you a quick one, little video, and we'll be back in a minute. If you're just joining us, we're approaching our question segment, so please get your questions and comments in. Just write them there on the YouTube or Facebook or wherever you are. We'll try to find them because we want to hear what you're all thinking about this. We're following the PDF in the description. Oh, my guest, I'll reintroduce my guest. This is Chelsea Rose, who is co-editor at the spiritual blog web magazine New Church Perspective, and this is Chuck Blair, who is senior pastor at New Church Live. And they both have New Church in the title, which is a Swedenborgian term. And as for what does it mean, we're trying to get at that here. It's a church. But what is church? Is it what you think it is? No. Unless you think it's good, then yeah, it is what... I don't know. So hopefully you guys are getting something from this as we're here right now. All right, so we're gonna continue. We're moving it back into the PDF. We're down here to Heaven and Hell, 57. And this is interesting because he starts to because he also talks about heaven, and heaven is another term that he has that is a different meaning than you might think heaven has, or he's using it differently than a lot of people use it. We can say the same of the church as we have of heaven, since the church is the Lord's heaven on earth. It also has many components, yet each is called a church and is a church to the extent that the qualities of love and faith rule within it. And when he's talking about many components, this, in context, seems to me to be saying, this could be different religious organizations, different faiths, but each can be, or different people within it to the extent that they have this in there. In it, the Lord forms a single whole out of varied elements, and therefore makes a single church out of many churches. And I like that. I just want to stop there for a second. A single church out of many churches. And I think that Swedenborg has that quote, variety is perfection. And I would say, that there's there are a lot of, and we're talking about church is an internal state. So really a single state out of many states, internal, I don't want to say state because that sounds like, Alaska, Oklahoma, Louisiana.
Right.
No, this is like a state of the heart, a state of mind, the variety is perfection,
right.
As Swedenborg wrote, and that, disparate elements working together actually make a more perfect form, and that he talks about that a ton in the human body, that if it was all one kind of part, we'd be in trouble. But because you have this diversity working together, that is good. That's another conversation. Let me just finish this text, and then we'll have you guys weigh in on it. I said that was a hip line. Much the same can be said of the individual member of the church as it has been said about the church in general, namely that the church is within and not outside, and that anyone is a church in whom the Lord is present in the qualities of love and faith. The individual who is a church is a heaven in least form, in the image of the greatest, which would be the image of the largest heaven on a grand scale, because the deeper levels of his or her mind are arranged in the form of heaven, and are therefore arranged for the acceptance of all the elements of heaven. So I feel like it's a lot. I feel like those are some dense sentences at the end. Chuck, what are we talking about when we're talking about that the mind can be formed to receive heaven? You know, what is that? Isn't heaven after you die, you can go to heaven? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think, the idea of the Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as in heaven, so upon the earth. We're not looking for a toxic evacuation strategy with faith. Right. It's not about how do I get out of here. It's about how do I welcome things into here. And a lot of that is clearing out space. That's what Swedenborg talks about repentance. How do we clear out the space? We're not driven by fear, anxiety, jealousy, revenge. And then there's a space there where then church can come in. And what I love about it is it kind of means that our default mechanism is to be loving human beings. Our default mechanism is to be a church in the Swedenborgian sense. And our job is to get the other stuff out of the way so that the good stuff can come in.
And that clearing out, this idea that heaven is a state of mind, and that when you clear that stuff out, it can pour in. That you kind of make a sort of a container for it. And that he goes into a lot of detail about what heaven is specifically, like which states of mind. This is, briefly would be love of, like we said before, love of helping other people, love of service, mutual love for the entire human race, and serving it in different ways. So I just think that's interesting.
Yeah.
Chelsea, do you have any thoughts? And when I say these things to you guys, like, do you have any thoughts? If you don't, just say no.
Well, I do.
That's why, and that's why I brought you both on, is because you have thoughts.
No, mostly just that I think it's cool what he said about how, these components, like the church is in miniature or whatever, is heaven on earth? Like, because people are often asking, oh yeah, heaven, thy kingdom come, everything. Like, when's heaven going to get here? Or whatever. And to realize that actually, even though we don't necessarily see it with our literal eyes, like that heaven is actually here already, and we can sort of be a part of that or sabotage it, but...
Yes, or both at different times.
Right. Every day, start one moment.
Yeah. And I would say that there may be, people kind of picture heaven like being rich, as in, like, I don't have things I don't want in my life, and I can afford things I do want. But the way Swedenborg is talking about having a state of heaven inside you to varying degrees may not even liberate you from all suffering, because you're still gonna, like, ooh, I can't help these people I want to help. You're still coping with it. You're still being refined and all that. So I just think it, like people, if there was heaven on earth, we'd be fine. But there's just not enough. That's why, if everybody had full blown church or heaven inside them, think about what that'd be like. I'm gonna go on a vacation. I'm gonna go to this destination, but do I need to be worried? Is this a rough area that I'm going to? What if everywhere you went, you knew that everybody was cool, everyone's nice. That would be a pretty different landscape, But so heaven inside could make heaven outside. Yeah. All right, we have one more. Are you both ready?
Ready for it.
People at home, hopefully you're ready. Let's get back in there. This is from Secrets of Heaven, 5595. Oh, this is getting into some terminology, and I wanted to throw. It's a little bit of a tangent, but it's already there, so we got to deal with it. Spiritual good is what makes a spiritual religion a religion. Spiritual good is truth that is turned into goodness. Truth turns into goodness when we live by it, because then it passes into our will, and from our will into deed. Are you all with me so far? Okay. And this, because you're going to need to know about truth and goodness if you read Swedenborg, because that comes up all the time. And here's a real succinct description of it. In this way, it becomes part of our life. And when truth becomes part of life, it is no longer called truth, but goodness. The will that changes truth into goodness is a new will existing in the intellectual side of our mind. This goodness is what is called spiritual good. So I chose that because he says spiritual good is what makes a spiritual religion a religion. So you got to have spiritual good. And what is spiritual good? It is taking concepts, this love one another, and doing it. And once it's done, once it's done enough that it's part of just how you do life, then you've taken truth, concepts, turning them into actions. And that Swedenborg thinks that is really important, because he talked about it a lot. And that is, if you want to build a church, those are the materials. That's the foundation, is learn something and do it because it's good. So do you guys have any closing thoughts before we get to our question segment?
Yeah, as I was hearing that, Curtis, I was thinking I had this great story, and it was a little bit being able to see heaven on earth, as well as like that idea of spiritual good. And it's a quick story from a wedding a few weeks back. I was talking to somebody, asked them what their best day of work was. They work with heart transplant patients. And she said, this is my best day of work, Chuck. My best day of work is when I get the donor families and the recipient families together. And, when it's a heart transplant, a donor family's lost somebody pretty tragically. That's not oftentimes car accidents, that kind of thing. And she said, this is the best moment. She said, when the donor family comes up and they each take a turn putting their ear on the chest of the recipient family to hear the heartbeat and to feel the heartbeat of their loved one. And I think that's it. That's heaven on earth. That's that spiritual goodness. That's that habit that we can form of just giving. I mean, what more can you give to somebody than your heart? Right. I mean, literally and figuratively in that moment. And how much is anybody concerned about being right? About do you pass a theological sniff test and something like that? There's none of that. There's humanity. There's timelessness. There's heaven in a moment like that. Yeah,
well, God is love. So people say, Swedenborg says it, and we can say that, it can be a phrase. But if you experience this, this person is living now, because of this, and the emotion with that, and that connection, that's a real life. That's going to Kmart. That's I've been in Kmart. I've smelled what it smells like. I don't
care what anybody else says.
Yeah, I've experienced Kmart. And that is important in drawing our map. So, okay, excellent, Chuck. Chelsea?
Well, with the idea of turning truth into goodness, and that's when we live it in our lives, I just find for myself that, so much of living goodness is not so much doing something as choosing not to do something. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, whether that, because I have so much of an idea of this is what I want to do, I know what is good, and so I'm going to do what is good. And even that has so much of my, self-interest in it and everything. So just that turning truth into goodness is sort of, surrendering my will, not necessarily doing what I think I should, but resisting things that I know I shouldn't do, okay, I know not to covet, and I know not to, whatever, steal and lie. And then and so the goodness that results is really just God's will, when you sort of let go, then it is goodness, because God's will is happening, and it doesn't have to do with me so much. It's just what is, and that is good.
Yeah, and that brings us back to in the beginning we did that heaven and hell segment. Oh wait, we didn't do that because I forgot to do it. But the idea, and Swedenborg says, is that the work is clearing out the bad, and then the good comes in. Yeah, if I'm hanging out and I'm like, okay, that's it, I'm just gonna love everyone, and I go up and I'm like, oh, I love you, and do this, people, come on, I'm working, but there's that can be a little harder to pull off, but the way to practice love, and it's not always obvious things, but it's okay, so Matt just made this, I'm talking about Matt because it's his birthday. Matt just made this cool animation or something, and people are complimenting him on it, and so I'm like, well, what about me? They're just little subtle things, and just to understand that even though in that moment I'm not going to tell Matt about it, I'm not saying this is based on anything real, but I know that's opposed to heaven, and that's opposed to happiness, and that it could make its way out into acts. So I know okay, I understand that you want to feel appreciated, but this is not how we go about it. So just doing little things like that, and that's the pushing away, and then hopefully something good spills in. So Awesome. Let's hear what everyone else thinks. Let's get to our questions, our comment section, all that. Okay, this is from Mark on YouTube. I'm surprised Swedenborg's concepts are not accepted more readily. Is this resistance throughout the Christian world predicted in the book of Revelation? Yeah, okay, so, yeah, why isn't Swedenborg accepted more readily? I think the Swedenborg Foundation asks itself that, like why, we want to, okay, we released a new translation. Does anyone want, why aren't there all these people? Yeah, this is so great. And I'm going to put out my ideas on it. One, I think it's a tough pill to swallow because it's got all this. One is what we've been talking about here. It's got all this religious language in it. Church. So that there's a whole group that's allergic to that language. But then once you get into it, it's got all this other stuff like, oh, you don't need to be a Christian to go to heaven, which another group is allergic to. So you kind of have it's hard to get people who are willing to get past both. And then there's all, and then it's like, oh, somebody can see the other side. No one can see the other side. So I think those are a few contributing factors to it. So those are some of my thoughts. Do you guys have any further thoughts?
For me, mine's really practical in trying to build a church. In this day and age, people are distracted. There's so many other things going on a million miles per hour. And the idea to take time to think about this and discover, like religion functions under the law of the farm, not under the law of the internet.
Right.
And it takes time, it takes cultivation. Then all of a sudden it really starts to grow. And I think in this day and age, that's just really hard. That isn't what people are necessarily looking for. They've got such fast-paced lives. How do you get people to actually start to think about this and, most importantly, create the time to actually live into it? I think that's our biggest challenge.
Yes, and I think you also have an uphill battle, like we're talking about. People these days have more of a mistrust of things that seem religious.
Absolutely.
And I think that, that's a part of it. And you got to show, because it's hard to get people past the initial barriers. Like, oh, it's this guy I never heard of. He says he's visited the spiritual world. He's talking about churches and this kind of stuff. To get him past and see like what we're trying to get into here. Oh, this is cool stuff. This is helpful, interesting stuff. This lines up with this. It's very hard to get people through that. Often when people the more they understand of Swedenborg's message, the more they're like, oh, this is cool. Mm-hmm. But the less if you only come across a little clip of it, your chances are you're not going to, and it's such a mountain to wade into, just trying to get started, understand what his terms mean. There's so much material. And then Mark was also talking about the
Book of Revelation.
Book of Revelation. Chelsea, did you have a thought on that?
Well, I don't know it specifically, but I was wondering if Mark is a reader of Swedenborg or not, but just to point him towards Apocalypse Explained or Apocalypse Revealed, there would be, I think Swedenborg does write a lot about the coming of the new church, like this changed mind state that we have the opportunity of, connecting to, and that, I think he says something about it not being received right off the bat, but it taking a long time to grow, and that I think it has some connection to the imagery in the Book of Revelation, the woman clothed with the sun and everything.
Yeah. So answer, read more. but yeah, thank you, Mark. It's a good question, and certainly one that I think about. Okay.
Ooh, maybe I'll.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, there's a website called New Christian Bible Study, and you can search Swedenborg's theology pretty easy. It's a pretty user friendly website. So
yes, and another show we got to do is the Bible show, because even more maybe than church, people have the allergic reactions to the Bible, and if you start going through Swedenborg, you're going to see him quoting the Bible. You're going to see him referencing the Bible.
Right.
So why? And wait, doesn't the Bible say there's no evolution? Doesn't the Bible, feature very few women? What's up with that? How is the Bible? So there's a whole other show we got to do about that. Let's not get into it now. Okay, Next question, please. Thanks, Mark. This is from Claire on YouTube. Why should people join the new church? Why not just follow the religion they like, or that is convenient for one reason or another?
Right.
Yeah, so joining the new church would be like... Swedenborg refers to a new church, and so sometimes people who are following Swedenborg's teachings will say, we're trying to participate in the new church. There's different organized groups in it. There are some people who are following it independently. So I guess taking the question as why do that, or does it matter what belief
Right.
system is. Since we're sort of talking about that, and that is a question that is maybe sort of like, should you eat less? I don't want to say sugar, but should you eat less gluten? You know, like some people have gluten allergies. Some people, as a specific to people, you know, like some people may have such a deep connection to their faith of origin, you know, and that is where they've really lived it, you know, and that, you know, that's what's speaking to them, and to try to say, oh, just go read Swedenborg all day, you may not get that same connection. For me, I find really interesting insights that I find sharp tools in Swedenborg's work is what it comes down to. That these are really things that help me when I'm navigating thoughts and feelings, when I want to understand the mind, when I'm looking for a philosophy of ethics and an organized way to come at, like, I can find it here. And so that's why you find me on the internet reading Swedenborg and trying to get other people to read it. So those are a few of my, because I find a depth in there that I haven't found anywhere else, and a potency that I haven't found anywhere else. I mean, in other places, but just not with the volume. You know. So those are a few of my thoughts, and that's all we have time for. I'm just kidding. All right. So, Chelsea, did you have anything on that?
Yeah, I think I have a few ideas. One is, like, we live in a time now where it's so, you know, globalization in so many ways, so that people are sort of these mutt, you know, religions. Yeah. And so, like, already people are, oh, I'm a Christian, but yeah, I visit this Buddhist temple, or I do yoga, but I'm Catholic or Jewish or whatever. And so the time that we live in now is really people are making their own religion for themselves. So whatever your faith of origin is, you're totally allowed to just, you know, dabble in Swedenborg or read some Swedenborg, and that's informing your faith, you know, if you find that, you know, useful or, you know, fulfilling. So as far as, like, there are new church organizations out there who make this their central focus, but that's not what necessarily the new church really is. Like, I think this whole idea of you can join the new church wherever you are, whatever your religion is, because with the idea of church really being, if you're looking towards the supreme being in your life and, you know, trying to live a life of love to the neighbor, then you're there.
Yeah. Yep. And the hope being that, you know, some people are gonna get into this material and, oh, I want more and more. Some people are like, oh, I'm happy with what I have, but this is just the puzzle piece I was missing to put right there.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So, Chuck.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm going to make a shameless plug here. Yeah. Totally shameless.
And that's a risk that we run, having you on this
Yes,
show.
it is. It is a risk. You know, I love the idea of people getting involved in churches. You know, I think there's something where we're such rugged individualists in our culture, sort of the "don't tread on me" flag of the American Revolution. And I just want to be an advocate for joining a church. You know, and you know, New Church Live's a great one. There's lots of great ones in many denominations, and there's something about how we can achieve so much more together than we can as separate parts. And you know, church organizations, I know we live in an age that's not big on joining stuff, but I do think that there is something to that, and the way a Swedenborgian perspective can inform it is great. I tell people all the time, you know, we're very fundamentalist about being very ecumenical. You know, that's kind of our, like, we're going by the book, buddy, on that one.
Yeah.
Which is that we're going to embrace everyone.
Yeah, and I think so. I was trying to make a metaphor, and I couldn't. It was about eating gluten. I'm saying that you see that some people don't want to join nothing, and they're good. That's the best. That's the happiest they're going to be. Some people would push me into this. Okay, I am happier here, and because everything in all areas of life can benefit. All areas of life can benefit from organization. You know, you think like, okay, we're trying to stop bullying, so we form this club, and we do, you know, church can be that same sort of thing that you can gain from cooperation. Some people want to live in the city. Some people want to live out by a lake in a beautiful mountain landscape. Okay, we're going to take one more question here. Okay, this is from Ilsa. How and where did Swedenborg gain his spiritual experiences? So from Facebook, and so how did Swedenborg start? So all this material, right? This wasn't Swedenborg sitting around and thinking things over. It wasn't even him staring at a beautiful mountain landscape and think, I know the mind of God now. He was having overt, tangible, information-filled, lucid spiritual experiences for decades, right? That's where this is from, as he says, from things heard and seen. So how did he gain those? I'll start. He records in his dream journal. He was having dreams that got more intense and more vivid, and then at one point those broke into actual, what we would now call spiritual experiences, and then from there, this stuff that we're reading, it became sort of a daily encounter for him, right? Do you guys have any? Chuck, do you have something to tack on to that there?
Yeah, I love the idea that Swedenborg was really a Christian mystic, and I love the definition of a mystic. A mystic is somebody who sees God everywhere. Mm-hmm. And he literally was seeing God everywhere. And I think for a lot of us, we have little glimpses of that in our lives, but I think he was gifted to be able to live it for an extended period of time.
Yeah, man, definitely. Chelsea?
I guess just that it makes me think of like just the facts of his life, where he grew up in Sweden and he was the son of a bishop in the Lutheran church then, so he grew up very religiously, but that he devoted his life to the sciences, and he was very interested in anatomy and physiology, and in finding the seat of the soul in the physical body at the time. I mean, this was the 1700s, and so while he was working on that and also continuing his own personal spiritual devotional life, recording his dreams, doing meditation and things, then he started having these spiritual experiences, and where he saw so then he felt like he was led, or at least from what I've read, that he was led from realizing he's not going to find the soul in the physical body, but that there's this whole spiritual world, and his whole idea of correspondences is really central to that of where is the soul, where is the spirit in this physical universe. And
he really did a number on his reputation as a scientist by going into the recording mystical experiences and everything. It was a whole turn. He had a very good career that he put on the line there. Okay, I'd love to get to a million questions, but we can't because of time and space, right? So we're gonna end here with a segment that I call correspondences. You were just mentioning correspondences. And this is the idea that there is an image in the things that we see in this world of something spiritual. Today we were talking about the church, and Swedenborg often says that the church, the joining of the divine and the church within us is like a marriage. This is what creates that, is this marriage of the divine and the ability of the divine to do dwell in us. So what we're going to do, how you play the game, is we're going to show just 45 seconds worth of just some images of altars, where a wedding could take place. And if we have it in the mind that, okay, this is somehow an image of the joining of the divine and the human, just have that in mind and be looking at these images, you may get some kind of deeper feeling, or just this, that's cool, or like an aha or something. So that's just a loose construction of it, and I hope you enjoy. You think just the intimacy of that, but also, and then the commitment in the work, and that it's, the wedding is just the beginning, and then there's this whole thing to come. So anyway, we're gonna wrap it up now. If you guys liked or tolerated the show and you want to help other people do the same, tolerate the show. The Swedenborg Foundation is a nonprofit. We run this off of donations, so you can click the link in the description, and there's a way to just make a little PayPal donation. That would be cool. Thanks very much, and I want to say thank you to my guests, Chuck and Chelsea, for coming on. It was a lot of fun talking with you guys. Again, their websites are in the description, and if you don't mind, we'd love to have you back at some point in the future.
Awesome.
All right,
This is
cool.
great.
All right, everybody, we'll be back next week, and we'll hopefully see you there.